AInewsdaily.ca is a website that gives you AI-generated news across 1,000 plus topics, 96 global cities, and daily features. Plus, for VIP subscribers, AI-generated images, tarot readings, natal charts, investment tips, bet predictions, and drill wars, a text and image-based life simulator game set in Toronto's drill scene. One VIP subscription unlocks it all. During our We Love Hip Hop promotion, all new VIP subscribers receive a $2.50 USD wallet credit. www.ainewsdaily.ca. That's www.ainewsdaily.ca.
George Haywood was principal of Pearson School from 1925 to 1926, Rosburn School from 1927 to 28, Sperling School from 28 through 32, Napinka School from 32 through 33, and St. Andrew's School after a 8-year hiatus from 1941 to 1944. So he was a principal of a number of schools in the Winnipeg area. Back on July the 6th, 1927, he had married Violet Lillian Bader in Winnipeg. They had 2 children, Brian Haywood and Audrey Haywood. 15-year-old Robert Chaulk and his friend Francis Darren Morrissette had broken into the home of Mr. Haywood in the St. James area, which is a large residential community in the western section of Winnipeg, on the 3rd of September 1985. They brutally attacked the elderly man, stabbing him 17 times, beating him, and leaving him to die. Knives, a garden hoe, a rake, bottle, and flashlight were all used in the beating. Mr. Chaulk slit Mr. Haywood's throat from behind while Mr. Morrissette stabbed him in the stomach. 1 week later, the boys went to the police and confessed to the crime. At the time of the killing, Robert Chaulk was a grade 9 student at Sansom Junior High School. Darren Morrissette was in grade 10 at Sturgeon Creek Regional Secondary School. According to witness Ron St. John, a 16-year-old friend of the 2 accused, Mr. Chaulk repeatedly spoke about murder prior to killing Mr. Haywood. He would say to me, "How would it feel to kill someone? I knew someone would end up dying," Ron St. John said. Others testified that Mr. Chaulk enjoyed fantasizing about killing teachers he did not like, and that they were personally afraid of him. Mr. Chaulk and Mr. Morrissette were said to be an inseparable pair. Mr. Chaulk, born and raised in a middle-class neighborhood of manicured lawns and bungalows, was described as a dull loner. He found companionship in Mr. Morrissette, a gregarious youth from an abusive home who liked to be the center of attention. According to Mr. St. John, the only defense raised was insanity within the meaning of Section 60 Criminal Code. Expert evidence was given at trial that Chaulk and Morrissette suffered from a paranoid psychosis, which made them believe they had the power to rule the world, and that the killing was a necessary means to that end. They believed they were above the ordinary law and thought they had a right to kill the victim because he was a loser. They suffered from paranoid psychosis, but they knew they were breaking the law. They were convicted of murder, but appealed the decision on the basis of an error in instruction on the definition of the word appreciate and wrong. The case would become a template for Canada. It was not enough that the boys knew what the law said about killing. The Supreme Court of Canada said the key question is the individual's capacity to recognize right from wrong, according to the moral standards of society. As such, it threw out the convictions. So Robert Chaulk was subsequently found not guilty by reason of insanity in a new trial. After 4 months of treatment, Robert Chaulk was found sane and released. Okay, so we heard about the horrific murder of Mr. Haywood. Robert Chaulk is pleading insanity. His whole plea is that I thought I pretty much ruled the world and I could do whatever I want, and I didn't see nothing wrong with nothing I was doing. And they said, well, but you know that it's illegal to kill people. He said, yeah, I know it's illegal for people to kill people, but not for me. Whatever I did, I'm standing on it. And so they're like, well, I think might be suffering from a severe mental illness. They gave him 4 months of treatment, and he was found sane and released. So the case was also a warning of the dangers of premature release, whether of the insane or of a willful killer. Chaulk received an absolute discharge from the Manitoba Review Board in 1996, which ruled that he was no longer a danger to society. 3 years later, the 29-year-old Winnipeg man, Robert Chaulk, was acquainted with his neighbors. The neighbors had no idea the violent history of the man living in their downtown Winnipeg apartment buildings. One of the neighbors, Mirzet, was a Bosnian refugee who came to Canada in 1996. So, Robert Chaulk is living beside this Bosnian refugee, and, he was let out, given the absolute discharge by the board in 96. The gentleman got here in 96, and by New Year's Day, Robert Chaulk was charged with murder again. Okay, Robert Chaulk he was accused of stabbing 2 of his neighbors to death on New Year's Day. So police say Chaulk chose to enter his plea before the judge alone, so the jury was dismissed, and that's when Chaulk pled guilty to manslaughter. All right, so there's 2 layers to that you have to look at. Depending on the case, sometimes it's advantageous just to put it in front of the judge. If you're worried that a jury won't really be able to remain impartial with some of the other facts surrounding the case, that you just want it to be weighed on its own legal merit. And then he was also able to get them to plead it down to manslaughter. And so we'll get in a little bit further into why and how he was able to mount a defense. But yeah, I mean, if you're staring at first-degree murder or anything like that, and then you can get it down to manslaughter, that's generally advisable to take advantage of that. Not even a second-degree murder at this point. So I'm not sure he's originally facing. It said murder. I'm not sure the degree. So when the judge asked Chaulk if he had any comments, Chaulk responded by saying the only way he could make amends to the victims' families was to accept the life sentence. Chaulk's mental illness wasn't an issue in the killing. So he was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 7 years. Okay, so at the time of this episode, based on all appearances, Chaulk remains in custody still. Okay, so he's well past his parole eligibility, but perhaps not past his demons. So, sometimes somebody can kill somebody. They're released back into society because they're supposedly cured of the mental illness, or it's been treated, or it's under control, and they go on to reoffend. So Vincent Wagwan Vince Lee was born in Dandon, Liaoning, on April 30th, 1968. In 1992, Lee graduated from Wuhan Institute of Technology with a bachelor's degree in computing. From 1994 to 1998, Lee worked in Beijing as a computer software engineer. Lee immigrated to Canada on June 11th, 2001. and became a Canadian citizen on November 7th, 2006. Psychiatrist Stanley Yaren, who later examined Lee, said Lee was hospitalized in 2003 or 4 after an incident with the Ontario Provincial Police. Okay, so Lee had been in the country less than a couple or few years. His first instance of being in the system came in around 2004, where he was hospitalized with the incident with the Ontario Provincial Police. But that wasn't a red flag to anybody, and he was subsequently granted his citizenship 2 or 3 years later. He worked in Winnipeg at menial jobs at Grant Memorial Church for about 6 months to support his wife, Anna. Pastor Tom Castor, who employed Lee, said he seemed happy to have a job and was committed to doing it well, despite a language barrier with other congregation members. I think he would occasionally feel frustrated with not being able to communicate or understand, Castor told CTV Winnipeg. But we have very patient staff members, and he seemed to respond well. Castor also said Lee did not show any signs of anger issues or any other trouble before he quit in the spring of 2005. He worked as a forklift operator in Winnipeg while his wife worked as a waitress. And so then Lee first moved to Edmonton in 2006, abruptly leaving his wife alone in Winnipeg until she joined him later. His jobs in Edmonton included service at a Walmart and at a McDonald's restaurant, as well as a newspaper delivery job. His delivery boss, Vincent Auger, described Lee as reliable, hardworking, and not showing any signs of trouble. 4 weeks before the well-known incident that took place in Canada, Lee was fired from Walmart following a disagreement with other employees. Shortly before the incident, Lee asked for time off from his delivery job to go to Winnipeg for a job interview. Okay, so when we fast forward to July 29th, 2008, at 12:05 p.m., on July 28th in Edmonton, Lee first boarded a Greyhound bus bound for Winnipeg. So, this is said to have been kind of the first warning sign. And he's supposedly going to Winnipeg for a job interview. But he's in Edmonton. He boards a Greyhound, headed for Winnipeg, around 6 p.m. Lee got off the bus in Erickson, Manitoba. So 6 p.m. the following day, which would be July 29th. Or the same day, sorry. Because it's saying July 28th. So I believe on July 29th at 6 p.m. the next day, he got off the bus in Manitoba with at least 3 pieces of luggage. And then he stayed the night on a bench next to a grocery store. According to one witness, he was seen at 3 a.m. sitting bolt upright with his eyes wide open. So now we're going forward yet to on the morning of July 30th, still at the bench, he sold his new laptop computer to a 15-year-old boy for $60. The laptop was eventually seized by the RCMP as evidence. The boy subsequently given a new laptop for his honesty by an anonymous businessman. Okay, so July 30th, 2008, Tim McLean, a carnival barker, so that's somebody he's a carny, or he works carnival games, where you try to throw a bottle or baseball at bottles or whatever it may be. He was returning home to Winnipeg after working at a fair in Edmonton. He departed Edmonton on board a Greyhound bus, 1170, to Winnipeg, via the Yellowhead Highway through Saskatchewan. He sat at the rear, one row ahead of the toilet, and at 6:55 p.m., the bus departed from the stop in Erickson, Manitoba, with a new passenger, Vince Wegwan Lee. Lee, described as a tall man in his 40s with a shaved head and sunglasses, originally sat near the front of the bus, but moved to sit next to McLean following a scheduled rest stop. McLean barely acknowledged Lee, then fell asleep against the window pane, headphones covering his ears. According to witnesses, McLean was sleeping with his headphones on when the man sitting next to him suddenly produced a large knife and began stabbing him in the neck and chest. After the attack began, the bus driver pulled to the side of the road, and he and all the other passengers fled the bus. The driver and the two other men made an attempt to rescue McLean. So the driver and two other men kind of tried to rescue McLean, but they were chased away by Lee, who slashed at them from behind the locked bus doors. Lee ultimately decapitated McLean and displayed his severed head to those standing outside the bus, then returned to McLean's body and began severing other parts and consuming some of McLean's flesh. So this is just, a barbaric attack. He's a cannibalistic frenzy. Just cut a man's head off in front of a busload of people as they stood by in shock. At 8:30 p.m., the RCMP in Port Angel Prairie received a report of a stabbing on a Greyhound bus west of the city. They arrived to find the suspect still on board the bus, being prevented from escaping by other passengers. The bus driver and a truck driver who had provided a crowbar and a hammer as weapons. The other passengers were huddled at the roadside, some of them crying and vomiting. As the suspect had earlier attempted to escape by driving the bus away, the driver had engaged the emergency immobilizer system, rendering the vehicle inoperable. Witnesses had observed the suspect stabbing and cutting McLean's body with a knife and carrying McLean's severed head. At 9 p.m., the police were in a standoff with the suspect and had summoned special negotiators and a heavily armed tactical unit. The suspect alternately paced the length of the bus and defiled the corpse. So continuing, I guess, to put wounds on the dead, the corpse. Well, yeah, the head and whatever else. He's chewing at the neck and whatever else. Police officers then observed Lee eating parts of the body. Meanwhile, the stranded passengers were transported from the scene to be interviewed at the Brandon RCMP detachment. RCMP officers reportedly heard Lee say, "I have to stay on the bus forever." Witness Garnett Catton said the attacker seemed oblivious to others when the stabbing occurred, adding he was struck by Lee's calm demeanor. There were no rage or anything. He was like a robot stabbing the guy, he said. When he appeared in a Port Prairie courthouse on charges of second-degree murder, the only words Lee reportedly uttered were pleas for someone to kill him. On July 31st, 2008, at 1:30 a.m., the suspect attempted to escape from the bus by breaking through a window. So the guy's talking about it when he had to eventually go to the Port Prairie courthouse and such. And he said all he could hear was pleas for someone to kill him, I guess. I'm not sure if that was just kind of peppered in the middle of things, but we're going back to the bus here, and the suspect attempted to escape from the bus by breaking through a window. The RCMP arrested him soon afterward. He was shot with the taser twice, handcuffed, and placed in the back of the police cruiser. Parts of the victim's body were placed in plastic bags, and they were retrieved from the bus, while his ear, nose, and tongue were found in Lee's pockets. The victim's eyes and a part of his heart were never recovered and presumed to have been eaten by Lee. So he ate the eyes and the heart, and those are very symbolic organs to deeper things. So at 10 a.m., the Greyhound representatives took the other passengers to a local store to replace their clothes, which remained on the bus. They arrived in Winnipeg at 3:30 p.m. that day to be reunited with family and friends. And then 5 months after McLean's death, his son was born. Okay, so he was an expectant father at the time. All Lee had said to this point was that he wanted to die. But on March 5th, 2009, a judge found Lee not criminally responsible for McLean's killing. The court heard Lee had been told by God to kill McLean and that he faced execution. if he didn't follow through. The judge ruled Lee was not criminally responsible as he didn't understand his actions were morally wrong and that he believed he was acting in self-defense. In Canada, an accused person must have the capacity to understand their actions were wrong. They cannot be found guilty of an offense if they can't. And so, while the horror of the killing sickened many Canadians, the process afterwards caused even more outrage. After sentencing, Lee was confined to Manitoba's Selkirk Mental Health Centre to be treated for schizophrenia. 1 year later, he was granted the ability to take walks on hospital grounds while escorted by 2 staff members. By 2012, Lee was granted increased freedom to have excursions into the community of Selkirk. The passes began at 30 minutes and slowly increased to day passes, but required a staff member and security officer escort. In 2013, Lee was granted supervised full-day trips to Lockport, Winnipeg, and nearby beaches. He was also allowed to be unescorted on hospital grounds, starting with 15-minute periods and working up to a full day. By early 2014, Lee was allowed to leave the hospital without an escort to visit Selkirk and was moved to an unlocked hospital ward. Another year passed, in 2015, and experts recommended Lee be transferred to a Winnipeg hospital in the lead up to a transfer to a community group home. His psychiatrist and other doctors also recommended Lee have unescorted outings in Winnipeg. The Manitoba Criminal Code Review Board allowed Lee unescorted visits to Winnipeg, adding he had to stay at the Selkirk Mental Health Centre or Winnipeg Psychiatric Centre. Finally, in 2017, Lee was granted an absolute discharge. The board found he no longer posed a significant safety threat. So, in the first case, we're talking about 4 months of treatment. In Lee's case, realistically, he was in there for almost 9 years. He was found guilty he was first arrested in 2008, but then he was found guilty in 2009, so he might have had some of that time in prison, but either or, there is a difference there. A significant difference in the amount of treatment that was received. However, that could only mean that just elongates the amount of time until recidivism or they reoffend. It depends how you look at it. The board decision said public safety was its paramount consideration and that the evidence did not substantiate that Lee posed a significant threat to the safety of the public. However, the board's decision-making process sparked controversy, with Manitoba's legislative justice critic noting its secrecy around releasing information about Lee brought the justice system into disrepute. McLean's mother, Carol Dedeli, also weighed in, saying Lee should be treated as a criminal, not a patient, and there should be no secrecy around her child's killer. The board relented. It decided health issues would remain private, but its overall decisions on Lee would be released. Since then, Dedeli has joined other Canadians fighting to change the criminal code to ensure that mentally ill killers remain behind bars for the rest of their lives in places where they can receive treatment. Okay, so Will Baker, formerly known as Vince Lee, has been living on his own in a Winnipeg apartment since November 2017 and is involved with the church community. He wants a full discharge from any conditions, but there is no way to ensure he will continue to take his medication. Because Baker was found not criminally responsible, he was eligible to apply for an absolute discharge, which he was granted, according to a report from Manitoba's Criminal Code Review Board. This means he is no longer subject to any conditions. Based on evidence presented at a recent hearing, the board feels Baker does not pose a significant threat to the safety of the public. All right, so that's just scratching the surface a little bit on some cases in Winnipeg involving the defense of not criminally responsible. Later in the Winnipegology series, we will do a deeper dive into the not criminally responsible defense, and you'll get a deeper understanding of how it works out in some cases compared to others. Will Baker is definitely a unique case. You know, and when we saw, you know, Robert Chaulk and what happened there, obviously it can bring up concern for a lot of people. You know, so we'll dig into that a little further in a later episode. But as far as the final thought on this one, mental illness there are an abundance of medications to alter the mood and mind of a patient. If we look at Winnipeg's history of producing insane murderers and the rate of recidivism, it appears that there is an ample sample size to draw from, and understandably, there are those in the community who would rather not have brutal cannibal murderers released back into society, regardless of how they are responding to their treatment. It's the opinion of some that Will Baker, formerly Vince Lee, had intended on committing suicide by cop on that fateful Greyhound ride. Perhaps he didn't want to face his wife and tell her he'd lost his job at Walmart over a disagreement. It's enough to drive a person mad, going from a software engineer to a janitor, Walmart worker, or forklift operator. Last anyone heard, Will is still a janitor at a mall in Winnipeg. Some, including those in authority, view it as cruel to imprison a person because they were sick. Can we be sure that Will Baker would continue to take his medication? What if he chooses not to, thinks he's cured, or doesn't like the side effects of the medications? Does it really matter regardless? Mirzet and Debra found out what happens when an insane murderer decides to kill again. Robert Chaulk was no longer insane when he slashed and stabbed them both to death in their apartment. He just might have felt his neighbors were too noisy, got upset, made a choice. You know, this Sunday, the congregation will be singing hymns in harmony with Will Baker. And when the donation plate comes around, he'll pay his penance to the Lord Jesus and pray for his forgiveness. But what about the forgiveness of Tim's family? Tim's child never got to meet his father because Will ate his father's heart and eyes, cut off other body parts, and kept them in his pockets before the child was even born. What can we learn from all this? Mental illness is caused by a mixture of environmental and genetic factors. Similar to addiction, mental illness untreated tends to lead to violence, death, and tragedy. We need to be aware of the signs of mental illness. If someone is sitting upright on a random park bench at 3 a.m., maybe it's best to just have them checked out by a doctor. If we got past the stigma around mental illness, and rather than stare, if we could direct the appropriate resources to those who are mentally ill, perhaps tragedies could be averted. Robert Chaulk has shown us that sometimes insane murderers are best kept under strict supervision. We can't paint every ill individual with the same brush, but we do need to be careful to learn from our past mistakes for fear we may repeat them. Just maybe stomp your boots before you walk in the mall. Make sure you toss your food court tray and everything in the trash before you leave. You just never know who might get set off the wrong way that day. And instead of New York fries, it might be heart and eyes on the menu. Yet again. Winnipegology.